a very good morning from South Africa and a warm welcome to our fourth episode on Everyday Decoloniality, a Multicultural Initiative. And this time we are very happy to have with us Professor Puleng Segalo, who is an associate professor at the Department of Psychology at the University of South Africa. Her areas of research interests lies in gender and trauma, critical, social and personality psychology, African psychology, amongst many other things. And today we will be engaging a discussion on everyday decoloniality in the South African academia, a women's perspective. So a very warm welcome, Professor Segalo.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So, Professor, I would like to start with a very basic question. So as a Black woman academician in a knowledge-producing space, which is still quite dominated by the white colonial structures, both physically and ideologically, what are some of the prominent social, cultural, political, and racial challenges that you have encountered till date in the process of creating independent, indigenous spaces of knowledge production?
That's a very complex question. But I think an important one as well, because I think it's important for one to reflect on the spaces where they find themselves. As you say, as a Black woman living within a South African context and working within an academic institution, there's always an everyday negotiation of one's place within academia, and also of belonging as well. It's important for us to remember that these spaces, these universities, when they were created, they did not have us in mind. They did not have Black people generally in mind, but in particular, they did not have Black women in mind. So when one enters such a space, you enter a space where you know that you were never wanted. It's almost as if at the beginning there was a favor, someone was doing you a favor. South Africa has gone through a lot of changes. 1994 happened, and following that there were a lot of doors that opened. So we entered spaces that were deemed white-only spaces. So it was a very political move. But the challenge is that as one enters these spaces, it does not necessarily mean that there's going to be an acceptance or change just overnight. When I started as a junior lecturer, for example, I had to contend with a lot of animosity, a lot of challenges where one would be questioned, where it was assumed that you are here because somebody did a favor for you, that the color of your skin is the one that brought you to this place. So it puts you in a position where you feel like you have to show that you are capable. You have to show that you actually belong in this space like everybody else who is in this space. And it's a very exhausting exercise. It's really exhausting. And so it got to a point where I felt that I've got nothing to prove to anybody. And what I will focus on is the work that I have to do. But we carry multiple challenges, multiple burdens, because as an academic, as a Black woman in academia, as someone who is a professor in academia, there's a lot of expectations. So it's not only the system itself, the actual building, the actual expectations, but it's also the responsibility that one has in terms of the students that walk in. Because when the doors open, they open for us to come and work, but they also open for us to come and study. So it also comes to the students that come within the space as well. So you experience a lot of challenges in a sense that you have students that come in with hopes, with possibilities, but with doubts as well, because again, they are also made to feel that they don't belong here. And so it creates a lot of what can I call it? A lot of expectations from you as a Black person, from you as a Black woman in academia, because the students come to you with hope. The Black students, that is, they come to you with hope, and they see you as someone who represents possibilities for them. Whereas on the other hand, you also have white students who look at you with doubts, who look at you with a questioning eye to say, does she even know what she's talking about. So these are the everyday things that one has to contend with. But I think with the journey that we have embarked on in terms of our decoloniality process, our rethinking of the space, our challenging of it, we have learned the vocabulary to actually critique, question, and challenge the spaces that we're finding ourselves in, and also just getting to a point to say, hey, we don't have to be apologetic for who we are. We don't have to be apologetic that we're finding ourselves in these spaces. And that has really helped me a lot to get to a point where I can focus on the work that I have to do.
And also, you were talking about, and I believe that it is indeed important to create such non-apologetic indigenous spaces where you don't have to consistently try to prove yourself in your own space which you belong to, that you actually belong to, but that's what's have been happening for a long time. And with respect to that, I think so many movements of decolonizing these colonial white dominant academic spaces, it at present a kind of global movement, and doubtless to say that with powerful and regular initiatives like the roads must fall, fees must fall, summer schools on decolonial thinking and doing, South Africa plays a very important role in it. In fact, I remember that during the first podcast episode which I had with one of the scholars from the University of KwaZulu-Natal, where she has elaborately reflected upon it also. But what is really provoking me is to revisit this aspect and to know the role play of women, specifically women in such kind of initiatives. In other words, what I really want to know is that are the initiatives associated with decolonizing the academia also take into account the necessity of decolonizing the patriarchally structured academia, or this aspect remains ignored? Is a woman's voice heard, or she is still being silenced?
A very good question. I think what you're highlighting is the issue of intersectionality, right? The multidimensional issues that we're confronted with. So when we're focusing on issues of decoloniality, we're looking at the ways in which colonialism has influenced and affected our everyday lives, particularly as Black people, but also more importantly, as women. So as women enter these spaces, academic spaces, we're confronted with a lot of issues. So you're not just only confronted with the structural issues where you have to deal with white domination, but you're also dealing with sexism and issues of harassment as well. So it becomes multidimensional. And as you were referring to issues such as fees must fall, roads must fall, where there was really a confrontation and a challenging of the way in which the colonial structures continue to look us in the face, and almost as if just smiling and saying you're moving, but you're not really moving. So needing the need to say and verbalize it and say roads must fall. And as it happened in UCT, indeed, roads fell in terms of the symbolic statue that was there, but that represented very lived realities. So the same happens when it comes to women as well. There's a lot of challenges that women face. For example, even sexual harassment within the academic sector. Just in the past year or two, there's been so many cases that have come to the fore. The universities have got sexual harassment policies, policies on discrimination, but you find that it's still a space that almost assumes that the woman comes in to just assist with the process. There's not enough women in management positions, as you know, for one to be able to make decisions, to be able to bring about change within spaces, you need to be in a position where you are allowed to have that voice and that power to be able to do so. And therefore it's critical for us to have women in these spaces. South Africa, with all the universities that it has, I can count with one hand, just less than 5 of the universities that have women who are vice chancellors. That for me is unacceptable. That for me still speaks to the the idea that women cannot think, women cannot produce knowledge. And so when we are busy with our decolonial processes, it's important for us that we put gender also at the center of it. And while there is a certain element to that, within the summer school, within the engagements that we've had, I believe that there's still room for more engagements to happen. We have the summer school here at UNISA, and in the past we've invited colleagues like Professor Pumla Gola, Oyeronke, Oyeumi also, who really do work on gender and really trouble the whole notion of gender. There's a number of scholars like Maria Lugones also, who does very important work on linking gender to coloniality and really problematizing it. And so I think that there is more work to be done when it comes to dismantling the patriarchal structures. Some of the things that we have adopted within an African context in particular is that some of these colonial notions of how we understand what gender is have actually been taken as part of coloniality, and now it has become part of everyday life, where people even own it and say it's our culture, that's how things are. But I think that's where it becomes important for us to learn our history, to know about our past, because then we will realize that actually some of the things that we've adopted and saying it's our culture, our customs, actually need to be challenged, and that can then speak to these problematic patriarchal issues that we're confronted with as a nation. In South Africa, we have one of the highest gender-based violence statistics and challenges, and as a result, it therefore becomes important to have gender at the center of the work that we do.
Yes, I mean, thank you for sharing this in such a detailed manner. And so with respect to the question of gender roles, once again, I would like to put forward a very individualistic question. So what I was wondering, that keeping the habitual experiences of some which you shared with statistics and all, of a women academician in contemporary South Africa at the backdrop. So how will you analyze and indulge in the praxis of decoloniality in everyday life to dismantle this patriarchally, colonially dominated, white-centered space?
I think that remains work in progress, and it requires a proactive move from me, from my fellow women academicians, and it requires us to ensure that we have process of mentoring, for example. So for us to be able to really make a change within the system that we're finding ourselves in, we have to support one another. We have to create spaces where women feel safe to be able to do their work, where they feel safe to be able to challenge the structures. And also, it's through us putting ourselves forward and making sure that we occupy spaces that are going to allow us to bring about that change. It means that we need to forge forward and make sure that we're in management positions, because when we're there, you also have a leeway, a room to be able to move around to bring about change. But it's also in ensuring that we encourage our emerging scholars, our young women scholars, to make sure that they study, they attain their PhDs, and we provide all the support that is required for them to be able to do so. But it also means that we really interrogate what gender means for us, as Africans, as South Africans, and whether the way in which we are responding to issues at the present moment is useful for us. Because if we're doing the work, but the challenges continue to persist, so perhaps we need to rethink the ways in which we're doing this work. And I think that's one of the ways in which to do that. And I think it's in the work that I'm doing, not only within the university, but within the communities as well, because we should not be detached from our communities. And one of the ways which I do this, I work with a group of women in one of the communities, and just connecting the work that happens here within the university with the work that's happening within the community, and acknowledging the knowledge that is there within the community, and bringing that into the work that I do in my facilitation of learning with my students. And I find that is one of the ways in which to do this. And collaborating with one another, collaborating with colleagues in other institutions, in other countries, and learning from each other. So yeah, I think those are some of the ways in which one can do this work.
Right, and I think this community work is also, in a way, I believe it's like very powerful, that kind of creates a bridge between theory and praxis, and at the same time between academic engagements and activism, which we fail to bridge. We talk about it a lot within the classrooms, but when it comes in the case of application, we see a different set of challenges are in front of us. So I think here we should end for today, and thank you so much, Professor Puleng, for your wonderful reflections. You talked about in length and breadth about the different challenges that the women face in the South African system, and also the kind of challenges you have faced from your earlier days, and how you look forward to overcome it, and the processes that you have already started engaging with to overcome those challenges. So thank you so much once again.
Thank you.